They built an empire on the assumption that Dorothy would always stay quiet. Her mother had made Miare the head of the syndicate, and then hand-delivered him to Dorothy as a husband. But the moment Dorothy uncovered what they were doing behind closed doors, her innocence didn't break, it hardened into ice. Standing outside the heavy carved oak doors of the private wine cellar in their Seoul compound, she felt the chill of the concrete floor seep right through her silk heels. Inside, the quiet murmur of voices carried a weight that shattered her world. Her husband, the powerful managing director of the syndicate, was whispering to her mother in a tone reserved only for lovers. Before she could scream, before she could even breathe, the door swung open, and the dark truth spilled into the light, setting off a war that would dismantle an empire without a single shot being fired. Welcome back to the channel, story lovers. Before we dive deeper into this explosive betrayal, let us know in the comments down below where you are tuning in from today. We love reading where our global audience is watching from. If you are ready for a tale of power, betrayal, and ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on all notifications so you never miss a moment of our daily stories. The estate had always felt more like a polished fortress than a home. Dorothy had spent the last 3 years believing she was the luckiest woman in the world. She had a thriving career managing luxury corporate assets, a mother who was revered as a kingmaker within the global syndicate, and a handsome Korean husband who treated her like delicate glass. But as she stood in the dim corridor, listening to the muffled intimacy on the other side of the door, the illusion fractured into 1,000 sharp pieces. She pushed the door open, the soft click of the brass latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet space. Miare froze instantly. His hand was resting gently on Evelyn's waist, his tailored suit jacket unbuttoned, his entire posture suggesting a deep, familiar closeness. Evelyn did not even flinch. She simply turned her head, her sharp dark eyes meeting Dorothy's with a calm, almost bored expression, as though her daughter had merely interrupted a dull afternoon meeting. "You slept with my mother," Dorothy said. Her voice was surprisingly steady, carrying a cold, quiet rage that made the air in the room instantly drop 10 degrees. Miare stepped back immediately, his handsome face turning pale as he adjusted his cuffs. "Dorothy, please," he began, his voice laced with panic. "It is not what you think. Let me explain everything to you right now." "There is nothing to explain, Miare," Dorothy replied, her gaze shifting slowly from her husband to the woman who had given her life. "Mother, say something. Tell me I am dreaming. Tell me you did not just do this to me." Evelyn picked up a crystal glass of red wine from the wooden table, taking a slow, deliberate sip before looking at her daughter. "Stop being so dramatic, Dorothy," Evelyn said softly, her voice smooth like velvet and twice as deadly. "You are 27 years old, not a child. You knew who Miare was when you married him. You knew who I was, and you knew how this family operates." "I thought he was my husband," Dorothy whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. "I thought you were my mother." "I am your mother," Evelyn said, taking a slow step toward her. "And everything I have ever done, I did to build this family and secure our future. I made Miare who he is. Before I met him, he was nothing. He was just an ambitious young man looking for a way up. I gave him the syndicate's shipping network. I placed him on the corporate board. And I gave him to you so that our legacy would stay in safe hands. Do not ruin your comfort and your life over a slight overlap in affection." "Overlap in affection," Dorothy repeated, a bitter, breathless laugh escaping her lips. "You treated him like your personal sugar boy for years, Mother, and then you passed him to me like a corporate asset when you were done with him. You brought him into my bed to keep him on a leash." Young Miare looked between the two women, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He had spent years walking the razor-thin line between Evelyn's terrifying authority and Dorothy's gentle grace. He loved the absolute power Evelyn gave him, but he had grown genuinely fond of Dorothy's quiet warmth over their 3 years of marriage. Seeing that warmth vanish into absolute stone terrified him far more than any threat from rival board members. "Dorothy," Mira said softly, reaching out his hand toward her in desperate pleading. "I care about you. My marriage to you, it started as an corporate arrangement under your mother's order, yes, but I grew to love you. Please, do not do anything foolish. Your mother controls the board, but we can fix this. We can figure something out together if you just give me a chance. Touch me, and I will make sure you lose everything before the sun comes up tomorrow," Dorothy said, stepping backward out of the cellar and into the bright hallway light. She turned around and walked away, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. She did not run. She did not cry. As she reached the main foyer, she retrieved her tablet from her leather briefcase. Beneath her soft exterior lay an asset manager who knew every single account, every proxy vote, and every legal loophole in the syndicate's multi-billion-dollar corporate front. They had spent years assuming she was just a pretty trophy wife sitting quietly in an office, managing small design portfolios. They had no idea she held the master keys to the entire corporate holding structure. Later that night, the rain poured heavily over the Seoul skyline, blurring the vibrant neon lights outside Dorothy's private penthouse apartment. She sat alone at her glass desk, the blue glow of her screen illuminating her sharp, unwavering features. She accessed the confidential corporate ledger for the syndicate's flagship company, Oceanus Global. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. As a co-executor listed quietly on the original family trust documents 5 years ago, a small administrative detail her mother had long forgotten, Dorothy had full legal authorization to place a temporary freeze on high-value asset transfers pending an emergency internal security audit. She stared at the screen, her heart aching as memories of Mira's soft smiles, gentle promises, and late-night talks flashed through her mind. He had brought her fresh white lilies every single Tuesday. He had held her tightly when her father passed away 2 years ago. It had all been a lie, a carefully orchestrated play directed and produced by the woman who raised her. "I am not your puppet, Mother," Dorothy whispered into the heavy silence of the room. She hit the execute key, locking down every primary liquidity account tied to the executive board. The next morning, the corporate headquarters of Oceanus Global was in an absolute uproar. Mira paced back and forth inside his top-floor executive suite, his expensive ties loosened, his phone glued to his ear. "What do you mean the main liquidity accounts are locked?" Mira shouted into the receiver, his polished demeanor completely vanishing. "We have a $50 million shipping clearance payment due to the European board by noon today. If that money does not move immediately, the elders will strip my executive authority before the weekend. I am telling you, Chairman Young," the senior accountant stammered on the other end of the line, "the freeze was initiated directly from a high-level corporate proxy account. The core system will not allow any manual overrides without the primary co-executor's physical security key and digital signature." Mira slammed his phone onto the heavy mahogany desk. Before he could process the panic settling deep in his chest, the heavy double doors of his office swung open. Evelyn walked in, wearing a sharp white power suit, her posture immaculate, though her dark eyes betrayed a sudden edge of cold anxiety. "Did you fix the transfer issue?" Evelyn demanded, closing the doors firmly behind her. "The board elders are already calling my private line every 5 minutes. They think you are mishandling the reserve funds again like you did in Busan." "It was not an operational error, Evelyn," Mira said, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. "It was Dorothy. She locked the accounts." Evelyn stopped in her tracks, her hand freezing on her leather handbag. "What did you just say to me?" "She locked the proxy accounts," Mira whispered, running both hands through his dark hair in frustration. "She used her asset management credentials. Evelyn, she knows the whole financial structure inside and out. She built the offshore auditing matrix for us 2 years ago. If she reveals to the board why those funds are frozen, the elders will conduct a full forensic audit on both of our personal ledgers. Evelyn's face hardened into a mask of pure steel. She pulled out her phone and dialed Dorothy's direct number. It rang 3 times before going straight to automated voicemail. Evelyn scoffed loudly, tossing her phone onto the plush leather sofa. She thinks she can play high-stakes chess with me? I taught her how to play the game. She is just emotional right now because she caught us. She will break by tonight once she realizes she cannot fight us alone. She is not breaking, Evelyn, Mira said, his voice trembling slightly as he sat down heavily in his executive chair. You did not see her eyes last night in the cellar. She was not crying. She did not throw anything. She looked at us like we were complete strangers who meant absolutely nothing to her. A few days later, a high-profile corporate gala was held at the Grand Hyatt in Seoul to celebrate the syndicate's newest real estate expansion project. The grand ballroom was filled with powerful international executives, conservative board elders in tailored tuxedos, and elite socialites chatting over vintage champagne. Mira stood near the main stage, sipping scotch continuously, trying to hide the deep dark circles under his eyes. His corporate authority was slipping by the hour. Without the $50 million transfer cleared, the conservative elders were growing increasingly restless, openly questioning his leadership capability in small groups across the room. Evelyn stood beside him, chatting effortlessly with 2 senior board members, her laughter smooth, warm, and captivating. But every few seconds, her sharp eyes darted toward the grand arched entrance of the ballroom. Suddenly, the ambient chatter in the room began to soften, a quiet ripple spreading through the crowd. Dorothy stepped through the archway, wearing an emerald green silk gown that draped effortlessly over her frame. Her hair was styled in a sleek, sophisticated updo, and she carried herself with an unmistakable, breathtaking aura of absolute power. Beside her walked Elder Kong, the most respected, feared, and conservative founding member of the syndicate board. Mira almost dropped his crystal glass onto the polished floor. Elder Kong never attended social galas unless a major, decisive shift in corporate power was actively occurring. What is he doing walking in with her? Evelyn muttered under her breath, her calm facade finally showing a subtle crack as her fingers tightened around her glass. Dorothy guided Elder Kong toward a private VIP booth near the front of the room, leaning in close to speak to him with complete poise and respect. She pulled a slender, encrypted tablet from her evening clutch and handed it to the old man. Elder Kong put on his reading glasses, his stern expression growing darker and colder with every single page he scrolled through. Evelyn immediately excused herself from her conversation and marched purposefully over to the VIP booth, with Mira trailing nervously behind her like a shadow. Dorothy, darling, Evelyn said, placing a warm, motherly hand on her daughter's shoulder, attempting to play the role of the loving mother for the benefit of the watching crowd. You look absolutely stunning tonight. I see you have already met with Elder Kong. Dorothy looked up, her expression politely distant and completely unbothered as she gently slipped her shoulder away from her mother's touch. Hello, Mother. Hello, Mira. Yes, Elder Kong and I were just reviewing the quarterly asset allocation performance for the syndicate's core shipping division. Elder Kong looked up from the tablet, his gaze icy as he locked eyes directly with Mira. Chairman Young, Elder Kong said in a deep, gravelly voice that commanded absolute silence. Care to explain why 40% of our primary logistics capital has been secretly funneled through unverified offshore accounts over the past 3 years? Mira felt the air completely leave his lungs. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out for a long second. Elder Kong, I assure you, those were routine operational transfers approved by senior management to secure international ports. Approved by my mother, Dorothy interrupted smoothly, her voice sweet yet sharp as a razor edge. But unfortunately, since those offshore accounts were frozen 2 days ago due to severe compliance irregularities, the shipping division is currently operating at a massive daily deficit. Evelyn stepped forward, her eyes flashing with dangerous, predatory heat. Dorothy, this is a private family matter. We do not discuss internal accounting dynamics in the middle of a public corporate gala. It is not a family matter anymore, Evelyn, Elder Kong said sternly, rising slowly from his seat and smoothing his jacket. It is a syndicate corporate governance matter. If those reserve funds are not fully restored and properly accounted for by Friday afternoon, I will personally call an emergency meeting of the board to vote on a total leadership replacement. Elder Kong nodded politely to Dorothy, gave Miare a cold, dismissive look, and walked away toward the executive lounge, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. The atmosphere in the booth became suffocating. Evelyn leaned down toward Dorothy, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. You are playing a very dangerous game, little girl. You think you can destroy me? I built this empire while you were still playing with dolls in the backyard. You built it on secrets and leverage, Mother, Dorothy replied softly, looking her directly in the dark eyes without blinking. And secrets are very expensive to maintain once they are exposed to the light. Ask Miare how much his secret is costing him right now. Miare looked at his young wife, his chest heaving with desperate, conflicted emotion. Dorothy, please, he begged softly, his voice cracking as he took a step closer. Come home tonight. Let us talk about this privately without your mother, without the elders. I will do whatever you want me to do. I will step down from the operational board. Just do not do this to us. Us? Dorothy asked, a faint, heartbreaking smile touching her lips before vanishing entirely. There is no us, Miare. There was only the corporate empire you traded your soul to my mother for. Enjoy the party tonight. It might very well be your last one as chairman of Oceanus Global. If you are enjoying this intense power struggle and want to see how Dorothy executes her final revenge, drop a comment right now and tell us who you think will fall first, Evelyn or Miare. We love hearing your theories. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss part 2 of this incredible story. A few days later, the rain returned to Seoul, casting a dark gray mist over the city. Dorothy sat in her private office at her asset management firm, reviewing the latest board proxy tallies on her computer monitor. She was only 2 votes away from securing a majority consensus among the independent board members. Her private phone vibrated on the desk. It was an encrypted text message from an unknown number, but she recognized the formatting instantly. It was from Miare. I am alone at the traditional tea house in Buckshin. Please give me 10 minutes. I have something that belongs to you. Dorothy stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the glass screen. She knew it could be a trap orchestrated by her mother to regain leverage, but she also knew Miare was crumbling under the pressure of losing his empire. She grabbed her coat and walked out to her car. When Dorothy arrived at the tea house 20 minutes later, the rain was tapping softly against the wooden sliding doors. Miare was sitting alone in a private tatami room overlooking a quiet garden, 2 cups of steaming green tea resting on the low table between them. He looked completely worn down, his designer suit wrinkled, his usual suave confidence stripped away entirely. Thank you for coming, Dorothy, Miare said softly, bowing his head slightly as she sat down across from him. I have 10 minutes, Miare, Dorothy said, keeping her coat on and her hands folded neatly in her lap. What do you want? Miare reached slowly into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a small, metallic encrypted USB drive, placing it gently on the wooden table between them. He slid it across the surface until it rested right in front of her. What is this? She asked quietly, eyeing the drive without touching it. It contains every private transaction code, every off-book contract, and every proxy voting mandate assigned to my office over the last 5 years, Miare said, his voice trembling with genuine, raw vulnerability. It has everything you need to prove financial misconduct and remove Evelyn from the syndicate board permanently. Dorothy looked down at the drive, then raised her eyes to meet his. And why are you giving this to me? If I upload this to the board's legal counsel, you will be destroying your own career alongside her. You will lose your chairman's seat. Because I cannot live like this anymore, Miare whispered, tears finally welling up in his dark eyes as he looked at her. I was terrified of your mother for 10 years, Dorothy. She found me when I had nothing, she built me up, and then she controlled every breath I took. She used me, she owned my career, and she owned my life. When she told me to marry you 3 years ago to secure her corporate proxy hold, I was bitter at first because I thought you were just like her, another control mechanism. He paused, swallowing hard as a single tear escaped down his cheek. But then I got to know you, Dorothy, Miare continued, his voice shaking with intense emotion. You were gentle. You were honest. You were the only genuine, pure thing in my entire miserable life. I grew to love you so much, but I was too much of a coward to stand up to Evelyn and tell her to leave us alone. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me because I was afraid of losing the power she gave me. Dorothy felt a sharp, painful knot form in her throat as she listened to his confession. For a split second, she saw the man she had fallen in love with, the soft, attentive husband who used to hold her during storms. But then the image of him in that cellar with her mother flashed across her mind, freezing her heart right back into ice. If I use this drive, Dorothy said, her tone cold and analytical, you will lose your executive title. You will lose your penthouse in Gangnam. You will be left with absolutely nothing in this city. I know, Miare said, bowing his head deeply until his forehead almost touched the wooden table. I do not care about the money or the title anymore. I just want to be free of her control. Take the drive, Dorothy. Do whatever you have to do to protect yourself and take what is rightfully yours. Just know that I am truly, deeply sorry for breaking your heart. Dorothy looked down at the metallic drive resting on the table. She picked it up, feeling its cold weight in her palm. She stood up without saying another word, slipping the drive into her pocket. She stepped out of the tea house and into the falling rain, holding the key to her mother's complete destruction in her hands. The first phase of her plan was complete, but as she drove back toward the corporate headquarters, she knew her mother would not go down without a ruthless fight. How will Evelyn react when she realizes her former sugar boy has handed Dorothy the ultimate weapon? And will Dorothy show any mercy when the final board vote takes place? The rain continued to pour over Seoul, beating against the floor-to-ceiling glass of the syndicate's headquarters like a slow, rhythmic drum. Upstairs on the top floor, Evelyn stood behind the massive polished mahogany desk in her private suite, swirling a glass of dark scotch. Her face was calm, but the vein pulsing softly at her temple betrayed the fire burning inside her. She had built this empire from the ground up, navigating dangerous corporate boardrooms and back-alley syndicate deals when women like her were never even allowed in the room. She was not about to let her 27-year-old daughter tear it all down because of a wounded heart. The private elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open. Dorothy walked into the room, her emerald silk dress catching the low ambient lighting of the executive floor. She carried her leather briefcase in one hand, her posture straight, her expression entirely unreadable. Evelyn didn't turn around immediately. She took another slow sip of her drink, looking out at the gray city grid below. I heard you met with Miare at the tea house in Buckshin today, Evelyn said softly, her velvet voice cutting through the quiet space. Word travels fast when you own the surveillance network, Dorothy replied, walking over to the glass table across from the desk. She set her briefcase down with a soft, decisive thud. Evelyn turned around slowly, resting her hip against the edge of the desk. She looked at her daughter with a mixture of cold authority and subtle disappointment. He is a weak man, Dorothy. I knew it 10 years ago when I pulled him out of poverty, and I knew it when I put him in your bed. The moment pressure mounts, he runs looking for someone to protect him. What did he give you? A tearful apology? A promise that he loved you? He gave me the ledger keys, Mother, Dorothy said directly, meeting her gaze without a single trace of hesitation. He gave me every off-book account number, every fraudulent transaction code, and every forced proxy vote you used to control the Board of Elders for the last 7 years. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, the smooth facade slipping for just a fraction of a second. She set her Scotch glass down on the desk, the heavy crystal making a sharp clink against the polished wood. You won't use it, Evelyn said, her tone dripping with quiet confidence. If you submit those files to the Syndicate Council, you burn the entire house down. You destroy the family name. You destroy your own reputation in the luxury asset sector. You are too smart to pull the pin on a grenade while standing in the same room. I am not standing in the same room, Mother, Dorothy said softly, stepping closer to the desk. I spent the last 3 days transferring my personal asset management firm completely away from the syndicate's parent umbrella. My capital is clean. My accounts are independent. You are the only one standing near the blast radius. Evelyn stared at her daughter, feeling a cold sensation settle in her chest for the very first time in decades. She walked up to Dorothy, standing mere inches away, her height commanding, her aura imposing. You think you are a strategist now because you locked a few bank accounts and tricked a broken man? I gave you your brain, Dorothy. I gave you your education. Everything you know about power, you learned by watching me. And you taught me never to leave an enemy with leverage, Dorothy whispered back, her voice icy cold. You made a mistake, Evelyn. You thought because I was soft, because I was quiet, that I would accept being collateral damage in your games. You mistook my patience for obedience. Leave the drive on the desk and walk away, Evelyn commanded, her voice dropping into the deep, terrifying registers she used to silence full boardrooms of syndicate men. Walk away, and I will ensure you are given full control of the European luxury real estate division. You will have more wealth than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. Stay out of my boardroom. I am not asking for a division, Dorothy said. I am taking the chair. She turned on her heel and walked out of the suite, the elevator doors sliding shut between them before Evelyn could say another word. Evelyn stood alone in the quiet office, her chest heaving slightly as she picked up her private phone and dialed her senior legal representative. Gather the Board of Elders, Evelyn said sharply into the line. We are holding an emergency session tomorrow morning at 9. I want Chairman Jung stripped of his voting proxy before noon. The next morning, the grand executive boardroom on the top floor of Oceanus Global was filled with tense silence. The long marble table was surrounded by the senior members of the syndicate's conservative ruling board, all dressed in dark suits, their faces severe. Elder Kong sat at the head of the table, his hands folded over a thick paper dossier. Miare sat near the far end of the table, looking pale and completely detached from the world around him. He didn't even raise his head when the doors opened. Evelyn walked in with total dominance, her white power suit sharp, her head held high. She took her customary seat to the right of the chairman's chair, placing her hands neatly on the table. Good morning, gentlemen, Evelyn said, her voice smooth and commanding. We are here today to address the temporary liquidity hold on our shipping division and to reallocate executive authority to ensure operational continuity. Before Elder Kong could speak, the double doors chimed once more. Dorothy walked into the boardroom, accompanied by 3 independent corporate auditors and the syndicate's chief legal counsel. She wore a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back into a tight, flawless bun. She walked directly to the center of the room, standing at the foot of the long marble table. Dorothy, Evelyn said, her tone laced with warning as she looked across the room. This is a closed board session for voting directors only. You do not have a seat at this table. She does now, Elder Kong interrupted in his deep, gravelly voice. He motioned to the legal counsel standing beside Dorothy. The chief lawyer stepped forward, opening a leather binder. Yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock, Chairman Young Mra legally executed a complete, irrevocable transfer of his entire 35% voting proxy share to his legal spouse, Dorothy. Furthermore, as the verified co-executor of the Core Family Trust, Dorothy now holds a controlling 52% majority of voting shares within Oceanus Global. The room erupted into quiet, shocked murmurs among the conservative elders. Evelyn's hands tightened on the marble table until her knuckles turned white. This is an invalid transfer, Evelyn declared, rising from her chair, her voice booming through the room with terrifying authority. Mra was under extreme personal duress. He does not have the legal authority to transfer board proxies without the explicit approval of the founding seat. I signed it willingly, Evelyn, Mra said softly from the end of the table. He finally raised his eyes, looking directly at her without a single trace of fear left. It is done. Evelyn glared at him with pure hatred, but before she could speak, Dorothy stepped forward, tapping the screen of the central master console at the front of the room. A large digital display illuminated on the wall behind Elder Kong, displaying hundreds of line-item financial transfers spanning 7 years. Gentlemen of the board, Dorothy began, her voice ringing clear, steady, and utterly hypnotic throughout the grand room. Over the last 7 years, over $120 million of Oceanus Global Reserve capital was secretly diverted through unverified accounts in Panama and Busan. These transfers were not authorized by Chairman Young. They were executed under the direct personal authority of my mother, Evelyn. The elders leaned forward, reviewing the digital documents with dark, angry expressions. She used syndicate capital to fund private offshore accounts, Dorothy continued smoothly, advancing to the next slide. And when those accounts were threatened with auditing 3 years ago, she used her leverage to force a marriage between myself and Chairman Young to consolidate voting proxy power under her indirect control. She turned this board's executive seat into her personal financial playground. That is enough, Evelyn yelled, her composure finally shattering into raw rage. You ungrateful little brat. Everything I built was for this family. You would have nothing without me. Nothing. I have the truth, Mother, Dorothy replied softly, looking at her with genuine pity. And right now, the truth is the only currency that matters in this room. Elder Kong raised his hand, commanding immediate silence. The old man looked up from the screen, his face cold as stone as he looked at Evelyn. Evelyn, by unanimous standing order of the Governance Code, your administrative privileges are revoked immediately. You will surrender your corporate access, your board credentials, and your proxy rights to the legal counsel pending a full forensic investigation. Evelyn stood frozen, the reality of the room crashing down upon her like an avalanche. For 30 years, no one had ever dared to challenge her inside this building. Now, she was being stripped of everything in front of the very men who used to bow to her authority. As for Chairman Young, Elder Kong continued, looking toward Mra. Given your full cooperation with the legal counsel and your voluntary surrender of executive authority, you will not face internal prosecution by the board. However, you are officially removed from the role of managing director effective immediately. You will vacate the corporate residence by midnight. Mra simply nodded, bowing his head in quiet acceptance. Thank you, Elder Kong, he whispered. Elder Kong turned his eyes back to Dorothy, his expression softening just slightly. Managing Director Dorothy, as the holder of the majority proxy share, the floor is yours to nominate a permanent successor for the executive chair. Dorothy stood tall at the foot of the table. I do not need to nominate a successor, Elder Kong, she said smoothly, taking a slow step toward the head of the table. I am taking the seat myself. Not a single board member raised an objection. The room remained in absolute, respectful silence as Dorothy walked to the head of the table, pulling out the massive leather executive chair that had once belonged to her mother's puppet. She sat down, folding her hands neatly on the marble surface. Meeting adjourned, Dorothy said calmly. 10 minutes later, the boardroom had cleared out, leaving only Dorothy, Evelyn, and Mira in the quiet, massive space. Mira stood near the door, holding his small leather briefcase. He looked at Dorothy for a long moment, a sad, bittersweet smile on his face. "Goodbye, Dorothy," he said softly. "Thank you for letting me leave with my dignity." Dorothy looked at him, her expression gentle yet distant. "Take care of yourself, Mira, build a real life somewhere else." Mira nodded slowly, turned around, and walked out of the building, leaving his past and his stolen title behind forever. Evelyn remained standing near the window, her back turned, her shadow long against the marble floor. The sharp white suit that had looked so imposing an hour ago now seemed like a heavy weight resting on her shoulders. "Are you happy now?" Evelyn asked, her voice raspy and devoid of its usual velvet polish. "You ruined your husband. You humiliated your mother. You split this family into pieces over your pride. You split this family the moment you brought him into your bed and then handed him to me," Dorothy said, standing up from the executive chair. "You thought power meant controlling people, Mother. You thought you could own everyone around you, your sugar boy, your board, your own daughter. But real power is knowing when to cut the rod out before it kills the whole tree." Evelyn turned around slowly, tears of anger and defeat shimmering in her eyes. "I made you, Dorothy. I gave you everything. You made a monster, Mother," Dorothy replied softly, picking up her tablet from the table. "But luckily for this empire, I learned how to control it." Dorothy walked toward the exit. As her hand touched the handle of the double doors, Evelyn's private phone rang from her handbag. Evelyn pulled it out with trembling hands. It was an automated alert from her personal banking institution. Every single one of her offshore reserve accounts had been legally frozen by international corporate compliance, her funds redirected into a secure, blind trust managed solely by Dorothy's independent asset firm. Evelyn was left penniless, exposed to her creditors, and completely isolated from the elite world she had ruled for decades. Evelyn dropped the phone onto the floor, her knees weakening as she slid into a nearby chair, staring at the empty boardroom in utter disbelief. Later that evening, the rain had finally stopped over Seoul, leaving the night sky clear and brilliant. Dorothy stood alone in the master penthouse office overlooking the glowing city lights. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Her personal phone buzzed on the glass desk. She looked down and saw an unknown international caller ID. She picked it up and pressed it to her ear without speaking. "Dorothy," Evelyn's broken, desperate voice came through the line from a quiet apartment on the edge of the city. "Please, just give me back board access to the real estate holdings. I have nothing left. I built that company. You cannot leave your own mother with nothing." Dorothy looked out at the vast skyline of Seoul, her reflection in the glass strong, sharp, and completely unwavering. "You told me in the wine cellar that you made me RA, Mom," Dorothy said, her voice smooth like ice and completely free of regret. "You told me everything I had belonged to you. Well, you were wrong. You didn't make me. I made myself." Dorothy lowered the phone and ended the call, blocking the number permanently. She set the phone down on the desk, picked up her glass of wine, and took a slow sip, watching the lights of her new empire burn brightly in the dark. What an absolute masterclass in nonviolent revenge. Dorothy turned her gentle nature into the ultimate tactical weapon to take down both her mother and her unfaithful husband. If you loved watching Dorothy take control of her own destiny and claim the syndicate throne, smash that like button right now. Drop a comment down below and tell us what you thought of Dorothy's ultimate move. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, dramatic stories every single day. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.